He was a veteran, returning home with his loyal dog after 3 long months away on duty, but nothing could have prepared him for what awaited him that evening. His little girl, barely 8, was struggling to drag a heavy trash bag across the backyard, her small hands trembling as her stepmother sat nearby, chuckling softly as if it were some cruel game. In that single moment, the soldier who had faced the world's cruelties felt his heart shatter in ways no battlefield ever could. What he did next would leave everyone who witnessed it in tears. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe. And truly, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Leave your country in the comments below. I love seeing how far our stories can travel. The late autumn sun sank low over Willow Creek, washing the quiet town in a pale amber haze. The streets, lined with tall maples stripped of most of their leaves, carried the scent of rain and the faint smoke of fireplaces burning somewhere in the distance. After 3 long months of duty in Texas, helping rebuild towns torn by storms and loss, Jack Carter finally turned his truck into the narrow lane that led home. He was 42, his frame broad and steady, the kind of man shaped by long years of service and the silence that follows battle. His dark brown hair was brushed with silver at the temples, and the faint stubble across his jaw only deepened the quiet gravity in his face. Beside him sat Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a black saddle marking across his back and a chest the color of wheat, amber eyes alert and steady. The two had shared more nights of wind and dust than either could count, and both had come to read each other without a word. Jack slowed as the familiar mailbox appeared at the bend. He had imagined this moment more times than he could remember. Emily running to the door, her laughter echoing down the walkway, the same sound that had kept him company through countless sleepless nights on duty. 8 years old, small and sprightly, Emily had always been the spark in his otherwise quiet world. She had his eyes, that same shade between gray and green, though hers still held the brightness of innocence unbroken. The thought of holding her again made his chest tighten with something soft and painful. But as he pulled up by the porch and turned off the engine, a strange stillness met him. No curtain stirred, no footsteps, no welcome rushing toward him. Rex lifted his head, ears pricking, tail flicking once before settling again in uneasy silence. Inside, the air felt stiller than he remembered, heavy with an unfamiliar scent of perfume that lingered in the hall. Clara's perfume. His second wife had a taste for sweet things, strong coffee, expensive candles, and the kind of fragrance that filled every space until it choked the softer smells out. Jack paused for a moment, listening. The quiet pressed in from all sides. No faint hum of Emily's humming from her room, no sound of her small feet crossing the floorboards. Rex moved ahead, nose low, tracing a scent toward the back door. That's when Jack heard it, the scrape of something dragging across the concrete outside. He pushed open the door, and what he saw made his entire body go rigid. In the fading light of the yard, Emily was straining to pull a large black trash bag nearly twice her size. Her small hands clutched the frayed rope tied around it, her arms trembling with the effort. Her face was flushed and streaked with dirt, a few strands of blonde hair plastered against her forehead by sweat. Each tug sent a soft grunt from her lips, the kind of sound a child should never have to make. Near the patio, Clara sat in a lounge chair, coffee cup balanced. In her hand, watching with the faintest curve of amusement on her lips, as if the sight of a child laboring under weight was somehow instructive. Jack froze for half a second before stepping forward, his voice tight. "Emily, what are you doing?" She startled, the rope slipping from her hands. When she turned, her eyes widened first in disbelief, then in fear, the kind that spoke not of guilt, but of conditioning. "Daddy?" she breathed, her voice thin and cracked. He crossed the yard quickly, kneeling beside her. "Sweetheart, who told you to do this?" She hesitated, the tears already forming before she could speak. "Stepmom said I have to clean the yard. If I finish, I can have milk." Her tone was almost apologetic, as if she needed to defend the absurd rule she had learned to live by. Something in Jack's chest tightened until it hurt. He turned toward Clara, who had set her cup down and folded her arms, her expression unbothered. "Teaching responsibility," she said smoothly, before he could ask. "She's been pampered long enough. A little work never hurt anyone." Her words came calm, almost elegant, but beneath them was a chill that made Rex's fur bristle. The dog let out a low growl, stepping closer to Emily, positioning himself between her and the woman without command. Jack's jaw tensed. Responsibility isn't forcing a child to work for a glass of milk. Clara only shrugged. You always did exaggerate. Then she stood, gathering her things, and walked back toward the house with deliberate slowness, her heels clicking against the stone. Jack lifted Emily gently into his arms. She flinched at his touch, not from fear of him, but from the soreness in her wrists. The skin there was marked with red grooves where the rope had rubbed too long. He drew a slow breath to steady himself. "It's all right now," he whispered. "You don't have to finish anything." She nodded faintly, resting her head on his shoulder as though the strength had finally drained out of her. Rex followed close behind, his tail low, the air filled only by the quiet rhythm of their steps. Inside, the light from the hallway fell across the framed photos along the wall, Jack in uniform, a much younger Emily laughing in his arms, and further down, newer ones of Clara smiling with carefully arranged charm. Jack carried his daughter to her room, tucking her beneath the blanket that seemed far too heavy for such a small figure. Her room looked tidier than he remembered, but emptier too. The drawings that used to cover the walls were gone. Only a few pieces of crumpled paper lay on the desk, the colored pencil stubs scattered nearby. Emily blinked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "I spilled the trash bag earlier. She got mad. I just wanted some milk." He brushed the hair from her forehead and forced a smile. "It's okay, kiddo. You rest now. Dad's home." When her breathing settled into the soft rhythm of sleep, Jack sat beside the bed for a long while. Rex curled up at his feet, eyes half open, still watching the door as if guarding both of them. The house creaked in the wind, and for a moment the years of service, the endless noise of engines and shouts, felt quieter than this silence. He looked around the room again, letting his eyes rest on the small wooden desk where Emily used to draw. On impulse, he pulled open the top drawer. Inside lay a single sheet of paper folded twice over. He unfolded it slowly. The drawing was childlike, lines wobbly and smudged, yet the meaning was unmistakable. A small girl, stick-thin, dragging a bag nearly her own height. In the corner, a woman sat with a cup. Beneath it, written in crooked blue crayon, were 5 simple words: 1 bag of trash, 1 glass of milk. Jack's hands trembled slightly as he held it. His throat felt dry, the room blurring for a moment as the truth struck him deeper than any wound he'd taken in uniform. He laid the drawing on the desk and turned off the lamp, letting the faint light from the street filter through the window. Emily murmured something in her sleep and reached out her small hand, her fingers brushing the air until they found his. He took it gently, feeling the warmth, the fragility, the quiet trust that still lived there, despite everything. Outside, the wind shifted, rustling through the trees of Willow Creek, carrying with it the soft sound of distant thunder. Jack sat there long after the night deepened, his eyes fixed on the sleeping child and the dog that would not leave her side. Somewhere between exhaustion and fury, a single thought took root. He had fought for strangers across oceans, but now the battle waiting for him was inside his own home. He didn't speak it aloud, didn't need to. The promise formed in silence, heavy and certain. By dawn, he would no longer be the man who only returned. He would be the man who stood up. Morning crept slowly into Willow Creek, pale light filtering through thin clouds that hung over the town like a weary sigh. Jack Carter sat at the small kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a cooling mug of coffee, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the steady ticking of the wall clock. Emily was still asleep in her room, her soft breathing a fragile rhythm that somehow steadied his own. Rex lay near the door, tail occasionally twitching in his half-sleep, the kind of rest only a creature that trusts can afford. Jack's eyes moved absently across the room, but something felt off. The corners of the house looked emptier than he remembered. The spaces between objects seemed wider, the air thinner. He stood up, letting instinct take over. Years in the service had trained him to notice what others overlooked, the small changes that told stories words never could. The old radio that once sat on the shelf, the one Emily loved to turn on during breakfast, was gone. So were the framed photographs that used to crowd the mantel. In their place sat a few cheaper trinkets, things that didn't belong. A hollow feeling stirred in his gut, one that went beyond irritation. It was the quiet sting of realization. Someone had been rearranging his world piece by piece, selling off memories while pretending everything was fine. Clara's perfume still lingered faintly in the hall, a sweet, synthetic scent that now made his stomach turn. When Clara entered the room that afternoon, her manner was light, her voice carrying the false warmth of a practiced hostess. She was in her mid-30s, striking in that deliberate way that came from knowing how to turn attention into advantage. Her eyes, once bright with charm, now gleamed with calculation. "You're up early again," she remarked casually, reaching for her cup. Jack didn't answer. His gaze drifted to the empty space where the radio had been. She followed it, then smiled faintly. "It was broken. I threw it out." The lie rolled easily from her tongue. He nodded slowly, not confronting, not yet. He'd learned long ago that silence could reveal more than anger ever would. Later that day, he walked down Maple Lane to pick up a few supplies, nodding to the neighbors who, until recently, had greeted him with warmth. An older woman named Mrs. Dunley, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, stopped him near her gate. "Good to see you back, Jack," she said softly, her tone careful. Then, lowering her voice, "Your little girl. She's been so quiet lately. Hardly comes out. Some days I saw her eating crackers on the porch for lunch. I thought maybe she wasn't feeling well." Her words struck him deeper than she knew. Jack managed a polite smile, thanked her, and walked away, but his steps grew heavier with each block. The image of Emily sitting alone, nibbling dry crackers under the sun, haunted him all the way home. The unease that had begun as a whisper now grew louder. He started to pay attention to the details Clara thought he'd overlook, the missing utensils, the replaced decorations, the small inconsistencies in her stories, the excuses about overdue bills that didn't add up. She often sighed about how difficult it was to manage while he was gone, painting herself as the overburdened wife, the one holding the family together. Yet every time she said "we," Jack realized she meant "I." The sympathy she demanded had turned into a subtle weapon, shaping guilt into obedience. That evening, as the sky turned the color of rust and smoke, Jack waited in the living room while Emily read in her room and Clara busied herself in the kitchen. He let his eyes wander, counting quietly in his mind the things that no longer belonged. The once sturdy lamp replaced by a cheap replica. The clock swapped for one that ticked too loud. Even the couch felt different beneath his hands, as if the fabric itself had been traded for something less expensive. When Clara joined him, he asked softly, "Clara, did you sell the radio?" She stiffened almost imperceptibly before forcing a laugh. "We can't keep everything, Jack. Times are tough." Her tone sharpened when he didn't respond. "You don't know what it's like managing this place alone." He met her eyes then, calm but unwavering. "You could have told me." That was all he said, but something in his restraint infuriated her more than accusation ever could. The mask slipped. "Told you?" she snapped, setting her cup down with a clatter. "You disappear for months, come back, and suddenly you think you know what's best. You have no idea how to raise a child. You only know how to give orders." Her words hung between them like smoke, poisonous and deliberate. Jack said nothing, not because she was right, but because arguing with someone who twisted truth into armor was like wrestling with shadow. Rex, sensing the tension, rose and padded closer, eyes flicking between them. Clara's lips tightened as she noticed. "Even the dog takes your side," she muttered bitterly before leaving the room. The sound of her footsteps on the stairs echoed long after she disappeared. Jack exhaled slowly, running a hand over Rex's head. "Good boy," he murmured, though his mind was far away. He looked toward Emily's room, where a faint light still glowed under the door, and a quiet resolve began to settle in him, something between weariness and determination. The following day passed uneasily. Clara avoided him, speaking only when necessary, and when she did, her tone carried the brittle sweetness of someone rehearsing patience. Jack spent most of the morning outside fixing the fence Rex had damaged chasing squirrels. It was there, kneeling by the boards, that he caught sight of the dog trotting back toward the porch, head low, carrying something between his teeth. "What have you got there, buddy?" Jack asked, standing up. Rex dropped a crumpled brown envelope. At his feet, the paper faintly damp, as though it had been hidden somewhere dusty for a long time. Jack frowned, crouching to pick it up. It was unsealed. Inside were several folded documents, the edges smudged with fingerprints and faint traces of perfume. Under the weak sunlight, the writing came into focus. Loan statements, payment slips, all under Clara's name. The creditor was a man named Wayne Doyle, owner of a bar on the edge of town notorious for its late-night fights and debts no one could repay. Jack read through the figures twice, his pulse slowing with each line. The amounts weren't small, and they dated back months. One paper bore his own forged signature. Rex whined softly, as if sensing the weight of the discovery. Jack folded the papers carefully and stood there for a long moment, the cool wind tugging at his sleeves, his mind threading the pattern together, piece by piece. That evening, Clara acted as if nothing had changed. She hummed faintly while preparing dinner, a fragile melody that cracked every few bars. Emily sat quietly at the table, drawing on a scrap of paper, while Rex lay near her feet. Jack ate little, his thoughts circling the envelope tucked in his jacket pocket. When Clara finally looked up, she caught his gaze and faltered, as though for a second she saw what he now knew. But Jack didn't confront her, not yet. He only nodded once and turned his attention to Emily, asking about her drawings, his voice gentle, even as his heart felt like a tightened fist. That night when the house had gone still, Jack sat alone at the table, the envelope spread before him once again. He studied the numbers, the dates, the name of the man who now loomed in their shadow. Clara's cruelty toward Emily had always been enough to wound him, but this was something darker, calculated, self-serving, dangerous. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint creak of floorboards above where she slept. Rex lay nearby, head resting on his paws, watching him with quiet loyalty. Jack reached down and stroked the dog's back absently, his thoughts drifting between anger and sorrow. The clock struck midnight, its sound hollow in the quiet house. Jack folded the documents and slid them back into the envelope. He knew now that what he had uncovered was only the edge of something deeper. Clara wasn't just cruel, she was desperate, and desperation made people reckless. He glanced toward Emily's closed door and then to the sleeping dog beside it. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it, but not in anger. This time he would wait, watch, and move when the truth could no longer hide. The night rain began as a whisper, soft against the roof, before thickening into a steady roar that blurred the world outside into shifting shadows. Jack Carter sat near the window, watching the dark yard through the dim glow of the porch light. Rex lay by the door, head lifted, ears twitching toward every sound the wind carried. There was something in the air, a tension that felt almost alive, the kind that soldiers sense long before the threat reveals itself. Jack had been reading through the same envelope for the third time, tracing the name Wayne Doyle with a heavy finger, when the dog gave a low growl that cut through the steady drumming of the rain. He stood slowly, moving toward the back door just as the old hinges creaked open from the outside. A tall man stepped in under the porch light, his frame broad but worn, his face sharp beneath a soaked cap. Wayne Doyle, mid-40s, owner of the roughest bar in town, a man whose reputation clung to him like the smell of smoke and cheap whiskey. His eyes glinted with a predator's confidence. "Evening, Carter," he said, his voice thick with amusement. "We've got business, you and me." Jack said nothing, only shifted slightly, enough for Rex to stand beside him. Doyle's grin widened. "Don't worry, I ain't here for trouble, just for what's owed. Your wife, she's been running tabs under your name. Real generous woman, but generosity's got to be paid for." Jack's voice was calm but carried steel. "Whatever she owes you, you talk to her." Doyle's eyes narrowed. "That's the thing, soldier. She said you'd handle it, said the money's yours anyway, and if you don't," he leaned closer, rain dripping from his sleeve, "I might just tell a few folks what kind of home you've been running here. People love a good story about a veteran who's lost control." Jack didn't move. Rex growled again, a low rumble like thunder. "You should go," Jack said quietly. Doyle smirked, flicked a cigarette butt into the wet grass, and stepped back into the rain. "You've got till Friday. After that, your little world gets real messy." The gate slammed shut behind him, swallowed by the storm. The next morning, Willow Creek woke under gray skies. Jack's phone buzzed before dawn, a flood of messages, each one worse than the last. Photos of him and Emily, taken from outside the fence, now plastered across social media. Captions written like poison, local veteran accused of child abuse. Father forces daughter into hard labor. Lies, sharp enough to draw blood. His chest tightened as he scrolled through the endless feed of strangers' judgments, the words blurring into noise. The world he had built, already fragile, was now cracking in plain sight. By the time he reached the front yard, two neighbors who once waved to him daily crossed the street to avoid eye contact. At the grocery, whispers followed him down the aisle. Even Emily felt the ripple of cruelty. That afternoon, she came home from school, silent, clutching her backpack against her chest, eyes rimmed red. "They said you hurt me," she whispered, as if afraid the words might make it real. Jack knelt before her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "People will say things they don't understand," he said softly. But the ache in his throat told him the truth, that words can wound as deeply as anything visible. Clara, meanwhile, played her role to perfection. She spoke in low, sorrowful tones to neighbors at the fence, her face drawn in practiced concern. "He's been struggling since the war," she would sigh. "I've tried to hold the family together." Those who wanted to believe her did, because pity is easier than discernment. Jack watched her once from the window, her hand resting lightly on a neighbor's arm as she shook her head, as if mourning some tragedy that had never happened. He didn't confront her. He simply turned away, the weight of betrayal pressing against his ribs like stone. That evening, he sat on the back steps, the same spot where Emily had once struggled with the trash bag, and let the cold wind dry the sweat from his palms. His mind turned over the events like a soldier analyzing a battlefield, each move, each angle, every weakness. Clara wasn't acting alone. Doyle's visit proved that. She needed his money, and Doyle needed someone to bleed for it. But now they had escalated from deception to defamation, and there was no winning a war you couldn't prove you were fighting. He glanced down at Rex, whose head rested on his paw, eyes still fixed on the shadows of the yard. "We'll find a way," Jack murmured. "We always do." When the house fell quiet, he found himself pacing. There was only one person he trusted enough to call, a name that had surfaced in his mind all day, a memory of someone who had once believed in him when no one else did. Maggie Rowan. She had been a reporter 10 years his junior, back when she covered the storm rescue operations in Texas, sharp, grounded, and driven by a moral compass that hadn't rusted with time. He dialed the number that still lived in his phone, half expecting it to fail after so many months of silence. It rang once, twice, then her voice came through, steady, clear, carrying that same professional composure. "Jack Carter, haven't heard that name in a while. What's going on?" Jack didn't waste words. He told her about the photos, the rumors, the loan papers, and the name Wayne Doyle. She listened without interruption, the sound of her pen scratching faintly in the background. When he finished, there was a pause. "Send me what you have," she said finally. "I'll dig." Then, softer, "You've always been the one fighting for others. Let someone fight for you this time." For the first time in weeks, Jack felt a flicker of something close to relief. Over the next few days, Maggie worked quietly but relentlessly. She called old contacts, traced financial trails through public records, and sent discreet inquiries to the county clerk's office. What she uncovered began to piece together a story darker than Jack had imagined. Clara and Doyle had been using Jack's credentials to apply for multiple short-term loans through a shell company registered under Doyle's cousin's name. The pattern was clear, the signatures forged but precise. Every transaction circled back to the same account. Maggie sent him screenshots, her messages concise. "They're laundering through you. Stay quiet until I have proof." Meanwhile, Rex's restlessness grew. He began digging in the backyard near the old fence line, ignoring Jack's attempts to call him back. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the trees, the dog barked sharply and began pawing furiously at a patch of soil. Jack walked over, puzzled, and saw something glint beneath the dirt, a small, mud-caked object. He knelt and brushed it clean, revealing a black USB drive, the metal scratched but intact. Rex wagged his tail once, proud of the find, then sat back expectantly. Jack turned the object over in his hand, unease prickling at the back of his neck. Someone had hidden this deliberately. Inside the house, he plugged the USB into his laptop, the screen filled with folders, dates, and strings of numbers, digital bank records, receipts of wire transfers, and correspondence between Clara and Doyle's associate. Each message confirmed what Maggie had begun to suspect. Money funneled under Jack's name, accounts masked behind fake signatures, timed withdrawals that matched the missing items Clara had sold. It was all there, cold and undeniable. He stared at the monitor for a long time, the rain starting again outside, tracing thin silver lines down the glass. For a man who had lived through storms, this one felt different. It wasn't wind or rain that threatened to destroy what he loved. It was deceit, the kind that crept into homes quietly, disguised as love and left nothing untouched. Jack leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, Rex's head resting against his knee. Tomorrow would come with questions he couldn't yet answer. But tonight, beneath the steady hum of the storm, he had something he hadn't had before. Truth buried no longer. Morning broke in a cold hush, the kind that makes every sound seem louder than it should. Jack Carter stood beside his truck, watching his breath curl into the air as Maggie Rowan stepped out from her car. She carried a folder under one arm, her face drawn with focus, the same determined calm that had carried her through newsrooms and disaster zones alike. Rex padded between them, tail low but eyes sharp, as if he too understood what this day meant. Inside that folder were the truths that could tear down everything Clara had built from lies, the financial trails, the digital records, the video he had almost forgotten about. They entered the precinct together, the floor slick with melted snow, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Jack felt the familiar stiffness of being under official gaze, that old soldier's unease in buildings where judgment carried weight. Maggie spoke first, steady and professional, laying out the contents of the drive and the documents. "This," she told the detective, "is evidence of identity fraud, money laundering, and child neglect." The officer, a broad man in his 50s named Detective Howell, studied her words with the weariness of someone who had seen too much but still wanted to believe in decency. He plugged in the USB Rex had unearthed, scrolling through the files with slow precision. Then, his expression changed, sharp and still. "You'll want to see this," he said quietly. On the screen flickered the security footage from months earlier, grainy but clear enough to wound. The camera Jack had once installed by habit, never thinking it would one day be the witness that saved them, captured the image of a small girl dragging a heavy trash bag across the yard. The angle caught Clara sitting nearby, phone in hand, indifferent. Emily's small frame strained under the weight, her face tight with effort, and in that silent gray video, the truth spoke louder than words. Maggie glanced at Jack, her eyes softening. "This alone could break the case," she murmured. He didn't respond, only reached down to rest a hand on Rex's head, feeling the quiet steadiness of the animal beside him. Within a week, the gears of justice began to turn. Police cars appeared outside the Doyle Tavern, their blue lights cutting through the early evening gloom. Wayne Doyle, red-eyed and defiant, was led out in handcuffs, his voice rising in curses that the wind carried away. Inside, officers loaded boxes of documents and computers, each one a piece of the tangled web he and Clara had spun. At the same hour, 2 officers came to the house on Willow Creek. Clara's composure cracked only for a moment when they read her rights. Then she straightened, the same cold defiance that had once manipulated sympathy, now turned brittle. "This is a mistake," she said, but her voice trembled. Jack stood nearby, silent, holding Emily close as the car door closed behind the woman he had once trusted. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of legal proceedings and interviews. Maggie worked alongside the district attorney, helping to verify the authenticity of the files. The town, once quick to condemn, now filled with uneasy curiosity. Rumors changed direction, like wind through dry grass. Some apologized, most didn't. But Jack didn't need their apologies. He had Emily back, her laughter slowly returning like sunlight breaking through clouds. At night, Rex slept by her bed, as though guarding not just her dreams but the fragile peace that had begun to grow again. When the trial finally began, the courthouse was crowded with faces, neighbors, reporters, strangers drawn by the lure of scandal and redemption. The judge, a woman in her 60s with eyes as steady as her tone, called the court to order. Wayne Doyle's defense crumbled early under the weight of the evidence: bank records, false contracts, and messages tying him to Clara's transactions. His plea for leniency faltered when confronted with the recordings Maggie had traced to his phone. "It's over, Wayne," she said afterward, not with triumph, but with the weary finality of truth fulfilled. Then came the part that no document could soften: Clara's trial. The charge sheet was long: financial fraud, child neglect, emotional abuse, but it was the human testimony that silenced the room. Emily sat in the witness box, small hands clutching the edge of the table, her voice so faint the microphone barely caught it. Jack watched from the front row, every muscle in his body tensed against the instinct to protect her. The prosecutor, gentle but firm, asked her what had happened that day in the yard. Emily hesitated, eyes darting briefly toward her father before settling on her lap. "I just wanted milk," she whispered, "like the other kids at school." The simplicity of it cut deeper than any accusation. For a long moment, no one in the room moved. Even the judge lowered her gaze. When the verdicts were read, the sound of the gavel felt like an ending and a beginning all at once. Wayne Doyle, guilty on all counts of laundering and fraud. Clara, guilty of child endangerment, financial exploitation, and obstruction. Her reaction was muted, a slow exhale that seemed to drain the last of her pride. Jack didn't look at her. His eyes were on Emily, whose small fingers clung to his sleeve as if anchoring herself to the only truth that mattered. Rex sat obediently at his side, tail still, eyes fixed on the movement of people in the aisle. Someone in the press row whispered, "That's the dog who found the evidence." The word spread quickly, and by the next morning, headlines would call him the loyal witness. In the final session, the judge addressed Jack directly. Her tone was formal, but touched with warmth. "Mr. Carter," she said, "it takes strength to fight a battle you never chose, but it takes greater courage to do it without hatred." He nodded once, unsure what to say. When the ruling came, full custody restored, all charges against him dropped, he felt less triumph than relief, the kind that seeps slowly through years of strain and guilt until all that's left is quiet exhaustion. Maggie met his eyes across the aisle and smiled, a small, knowing gesture. It was enough. Outside the courthouse, winter sunlight broke through the clouds, thin but bright. Reporters called his name, cameras flashing. But Jack didn't stop. Emily clung to his hand, her laughter uncertain but real. Rex trotted ahead, pausing every few steps to glance back, as though making sure his people followed. Maggie caught up to them near the steps. "You did good," she said softly. "You both did." Jack shook his head. "We just told the truth," she smiled. "Sometimes that's the hardest thing of all." That evening, as dusk settled over Willow Creek, Jack sat on the porch again, Emily curled beside him, Rex at their feet. The air was still, washed clean by the day's fading light. From somewhere in town came the distant hum of a train. Emily leaned against him and asked, "Daddy, are we safe now?" He looked down at her and nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, we are." Rex lifted his head, ears flicking toward the sound, then rested again, satisfied. For the first time in a long while, peace didn't feel like a memory. It felt like home. A full year had passed since the courthouse doors closed behind them, and Willow Creek had moved on, as small towns always do. Yet, on the quiet edge of town, where the old fields gave way to the open sky, a new kind of life had taken root. The house that Jack Carter once called home now held laughter that no longer trembled, footsteps that no longer feared the sound of anger. The sign out front read, "New Dawn Center," its letters carved by Jack himself and painted by Emily's small hands. It was not much, a converted home with bright walls, wide windows, and a fenced yard. But to those who entered, it felt like a promise kept. Jack had poured every piece of himself into the place, using his modest savings and the help of kind-hearted locals who remembered what it meant to start over. He wasn't a man of speeches or ceremony. His way of teaching was quiet, through presence and work. Each morning, he arrived before sunrise, unlocking the doors so the children could have breakfast before school. They came shyly at first, small faces with eyes that had seen too much, but they stayed because they felt something they didn't have elsewhere: safety without condition. Jack understood silence better than words, and to children who carried the same kind of silence, that mattered more than anything. Emily had grown in ways that startled even him. At 9, she had the gentleness of someone who remembered pain and chose to turn it into kindness. She spent hours in the art room, really just a sunlit corner with easels and mismatched chairs, teaching the younger children to paint their feelings, to give shape to what they couldn't yet say. Sometimes she would tell them her story, not as a tragedy, but as a parable of hope. Once, she would say softly, "I had to trade hard work for a glass of milk, but that was when I didn't know that love should never need trading." The children listened wide-eyed, and by the time her story ended, they no longer looked at their own scars as curses, but as proof they had survived. Rex, now 7, had become something of a legend at the center. The German shepherd's sable coat had lightened slightly with age, his movements slower but still graceful. To the children, he was the quiet guardian, the silent hero, as Maggie once called him. He had an uncanny sense for fear. Whenever a child grew tense or withdrawn, Rex would simply lie beside them, resting his head near their lap until the shaking stopped. Therapists who visited called it instinct, but Jack thought it was something deeper, something that belonged to hearts that had known too much and learned to listen anyway. On most afternoons, Rex could be found sprawled under the big oak tree, surrounded by children who whispered secrets into his fur, knowing he'd never tell. News of the new Dawn Center spread beyond Willow Creek. It wasn't fame Jack sought, but purpose has a way of being noticed. Donations arrived quietly: old toys, blankets, paint supplies, and sometimes envelopes with no return address, only notes that said for the kids. One crisp autumn day, a familiar figure appeared at the gate, Maggie Rowan, carrying her camera and notebook. She smiled when she saw Jack, and for a moment, neither spoke. "It's beautiful," she said finally, glancing around at the laughter spilling from the yard. "You turned pain into something living." He shrugged lightly. "It was Emily's idea to name it New Dawn," he replied. Maggie smiled. Then she understood before anyone else that light always finds a way back. Over the next week, Maggie spent her days observing, taking photos, and talking quietly with the children. Her article, published later that month, carried the title "The Man Without a Cape," a father who taught kindness through silence. It began not with the scandal or the trial, but with a scene she'd witnessed one afternoon. Jack kneeling beside a boy who had refused to speak since his arrival, showing him how to fix a broken toy car. "In a world that applauds loud heroes," she wrote, "there are still those who mend what's broken without needing applause." The story spread far and wide, but for Jack, the truest reward was seeing Emily's proud smile when she read it aloud to the children. Winter returned gently that year, as if the town itself had learned compassion. Snow gathered on the fence posts and blanketed the small garden behind the center. Jack spent his evenings there, pruning, tending, making space for the spring that would come. He often found Emily sitting beside him, sketching in her notebook, Rex stretched out nearby. One evening, she put down her pencil and looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. "Daddy," she said, "I think I want to plant flowers here." He looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting. "Flowers?" She nodded. "Because when something beautiful grows where sadness used to live, it means we've won." He didn't answer right away, just watched her trace the outline of petals on the frozen soil. Rex shifted, exhaling a soft sigh, the kind that always seemed to echo Jack's own feelings. The setting sun painted the sky gold, and for a fleeting moment, everything around them seemed suspended. The laughter inside, the quiet strength of the earth, the simple heartbeat of home. Emily turned to him again, eyes glimmering. "You know, Daddy," she whispered, "I don't have to drag trash bags anymore. I just want to plant flowers." Her words were gentle, but they carried the weight of all that had come before. Jack felt his throat tighten. He reached over and rested a hand on her shoulder. "Then let's make this garden big enough for everyone who needs it," he said softly. Rex lifted his head, his amber eyes following a bird sweeping across the glowing horizon. The air held that delicate stillness between day and night, the kind that feels like gratitude made visible. Jack leaned back, against the wooden fence, watching the last of the light spill across the field. He thought of the faces they had helped, the laughter that had returned, and the silent promise that the worst days would no longer define them. Beside him, Emily hummed a tune she'd made up, something small and bright. Rex's tail thumped once against the earth. When darkness finally settled, the porch light flicked on, casting a warm glow over the three of them. From the road, they might have looked like any ordinary family. Nothing remarkable, no medals, no fame. Yet within that circle of light lay something extraordinary. The quiet victory of love over fear, of gentleness over cruelty. The world had broken them once, but they had rebuilt themselves not in anger, but in grace. And though Jack didn't believe in saints or miracles, he believed in this, the strength it takes to forgive without forgetting, to nurture where others destroy. The next morning, the sun rose clear and gold over Willow Creek. The frost melted off the roof, and the air smelled faintly of earth and hope. Inside the yard, small green shoots had already begun to press through the soil Emily had turned with her tiny hands. She looked at them and smiled, her breath forming little clouds in the cold air. Behind her, Jack watched quietly, one hand resting on Rex's back. The dog tilted his head toward the warmth of the sun, his expression serene. The world at last felt right again. Sometimes, the quietest souls carry the greatest courage. People like Jack, who protect without promise of reward. Children like Emily, who learn to love again after the storm. And loyal hearts like Rex, who remind us that compassion needs no words. In a world that often mistakes noise for strength, it is these gentle acts, the small kindnesses, the unseen sacrifices, that truly hold us together. And maybe that's what grace really is, doing what's right even when no one's watching. If this story touched something in you, take a moment to share it, to tell us what you felt in the comments below, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the goodness still left in the world. May God bless you wherever you are, and may the quiet heroes among us always find peace in their hearts.